As I'm writing this, it has been a bit more than a year since I lost my grandfather. That is, my grandfather on my mother's side of the family. This year, and even around a similar time frame, I lost a grandfather on my father's side of the family as well. I mention this because it's in this context, one of pain, loss, and a hell of a lot of stress, that a remnant memory from my childhood was rediscovered for me. And through the rediscovery of that memory, I found a new sense of comfort, joy, and most importantly, hope. It was through this that I was able to not only help cope with the loss, but also learn to be able to move forward, accept what's happened, and see that life is still good, that there's still so much to enjoy out there, and that generally, things do have a way of being okay in the end, despite how things can sometimes feel. I've been following this newly rediscovered memory of mine for a solid year now, and I feel it's had quite an impact on how I've dealt with the many troubles I've faced this year. It encouraged me to keep my head held high and push through the temporary pain, and so I want to talk about it for a bit. This isn't my usual kind of video. It's not about a video game or the games industry, nor is it some kind of meme or anything in between. This is a recommendation of a media franchise that I have grown to cherish since the summer of 2023. And I think you should give it a try, too. Who knows, maybe it'll help you like it did me. This one's for you, Mickey. This is Ultraman. If you were listening carefully to the previous paragraph, you'd notice how I said I rediscovered Ultraman. Ultraman is not necessarily new to me, though it isn't familiar to me either. My history with it goes all the way back to when I was a kid. I had a small TV in the corner of my cramped bedroom that didn't have access to cable or anything like that. So my only option was to watch the movies and TV shows I had on DVD on repeat when I would go to sleep. I also eventually had a GameCube in there, but that's besides the point. At some point, my dad came across a DVD for the English dub of the original 1966 Ultraman show, or a Volume 1 or something like that. This was so far back that my memories of it are rather vague. However, I remember asking my dad about it and finding out that he also watched some of the English dub when he was a really little kid. So now I got to see it as well. It wasn't much, but it burned the image of Ultraman into the back of my tiny mind, leaving it there even after I moved on from it. That is, until around the spring and eventually into the summer of 2023 when I started getting these videos recommended to me about Ultraman. I feel almost certain it was an Ultraman Iceberg video that did it, because I was watching a few Iceberg videos at the time, so it just probably showed up. But either way, the memories came flooding back and I just had to look into this and see what's been happening with this show that I had only seen the oldest version of as a kid. And honestly, I was hooked. I started picking out shows from Tsuburaya's YouTube channel to start with, namely Ultraman Z, and then Blazar once that started airing. And I loved it for two main reasons: style and sincerity. So what do I mean when I say style? Well, Ultraman is this thing called a tokusatsu show, which for those who are unaware is a kind of show that puts a lot of focus on its special effects, specifically in the context of practical effects in live-action shows and movies. The one that most people will be familiar with is Godzilla, but there's a lot more, like Kamen Rider, the titular Ultraman, and Super Sentai, with Super Sentai being the basis for what we in the West know as the Power Rangers. And while there's been a lot more CGI influence on recent Ultraman shows, as there has been on pretty much any show nowadays, you can still see those practical effects come through. Both the Ultraman in question, as well as the monsters being fought, typically take the form of actual suit costumes rather than just animated CGI characters, and they almost always fight on these miniaturized sets that are broken apart and rigged to do a variety of things given whatever the fight choreography demands. I've taken such a liking to this because you just don't see this amount of dedication to practical effects anymore in most Western media. The highest budget Disney slop out there is supposed to be live action, but it's so caked in CGI that it's basically just animated, and every other studio tries the exact same thing the moment they have enough money, just throwing enough at it that they can have animated effects. The skill and artistry of practical effects is lost, so I really respect the people behind Ultraman for sticking to their guns on that. And that last part actually brings me to my second note about Sincerity, and the note that I find the most important. This one's pretty simple. When I say sincerity, I basically just mean that Ultraman shows aren't just filled to the brim with the stupid, Marvel-esque, he's right behind me, isn't he, self-aware irony that plagues so much of our entertainment now. So many of the writers behind newer fantasy and sci-fi media projects feel this need to either make this stuff more realistic or acknowledge that it's unrealistic with writing that is constantly winking at the camera to let everyone know they're in on the joke. And you know what? It can be funny the first few times, but when it starts to feel like everyone is making lampshading quips every other sentence, it gets exhausting. In contrast, Ultraman doesn't seem to do that. Sure, there's comedy and silly moments and things, but they're not actively trying to undermine the logic of their own plot or world building. Ultraman's not up there making quips about how absurd the situation is whilst in the middle of a kaiju battle. Now, depending on the kaiju, there can be something silly happening, but Ultraman still ultimately recognizes that he's on a mission to protect people, and that takes priority. The situation is as it is, and everybody involved is taking it straight and seriously. At least about as straight and seriously as you can for a show like Ultraman. None of this they fly now nonsense that undermines the plot. All this to say that Ultraman's not some cynical deconstruction or an ironic postmodern comedy. Ultraman offers genuine messages of hope and optimism for a brighter future with no strings attached. And for someone who had just lost their grandfather the year they discovered it, and has now lost an additional grandfather this year as well, and has even lost both of my dogs within a few months of each other this year, that's the kind of message that's sorely needed. I know I probably started to devolve into a ramble by the end there, but that was the best I could try and explain how I've come to view Ultraman during this whole year, soon to be 2, that I've rediscovered this show and immersed myself in everything it has to offer. And because of the circumstances surrounding my rediscovery of the show, I've gained a bit of an emotional attachment to it, so I hope you forgive me for some of my rambling. I just really wanted to get my feelings out on this matter and do it some more justice than a simple unscripted rant would do. Either way, I sincerely hope you all go and watch some Ultraman now, whether it be Blazar, Arc, Zet, Orb, or whoever else. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later. And lastly, a special thank you shout out to Turtle Taco, Sun Mingo, Scarlet, Mike Uniturtle, Dizerat, and Reese. Thank you for the support.